Hello and welcome to another episode of the Mining Conversation with MsTedy. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Menor, and today I am joined by Dr. Talifhani Khubana, who is the Chief Financial Officer at the South African Human Rights Commission, and he also holds a PhD in Business Management. Before we start the conversation, I would first like to thank my team, who is Tsepo Munyamani, Kamuhelo Malangabi, as well as Nkele Khatebe. And also, please do not forget to like, share, subscribe, and follow so that you do not miss any of our episodes. With that being said, I'd like to welcome you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming through.
No, it's a pleasure.
Wonderful. So before we just start with the conversation, can you kindly just briefly introduce yourself? I don't want to do it because your CV is just way too long, but you know which aspects of your CV you would like to touch on. So kindly do the honors.
Okay. No, Talifhani Khubana is, I almost refer to myself as a young man.
Yeah.
But I think I'm grown now. So I basically hail from Limpopo, from one of the rural villages there. And currently I am a Chief Financial Officer of the South African Human Rights Commission, and I am pretty much a seasoned executive right now.
Yeah.
With experience both in the private sector and public sector, majority of which, of course, in the public sector. In terms of educational background, I hold a PhD in business management, which I received from the Nelson Mandela University, and a study that I conducted, which has also led pretty much to this conversation, was exploring perceptions in creation of shared value within the South African mining industry.
Yeah.
I hold an MBA. I've got honors degree in accounting. Generally, I'm an accountant.
Yeah.
It's only that I am trying to be more than just a mere accountant by exploring other parts in my life.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So just tell us about your research. What inspired you to do research on shared value in the South African mining industry?
Yeah, so my inspiration came first. I must indicate that the inspiration to pursue the journey itself is informed by where I come from. I come from a very humble background, a small village, where this idea that you could produce a doctor from such a village could be something that is quite remote. So for me, I thought it would be a great opportunity to pursue a PhD, not for myself, but also just to those that come after me, to remind them that it's really possible for them to become anything as long as they put their mind and effort to it. The second part to it is the fact that I have looked at some of the common problems in South Africa and across the world when we talk about the agenda of sustainability. So looking at that, I then asked myself whether capitalism was a correct vehicle that could take us to achieving this whole idea of sustainability. As a result, I then wanted to explore more on the concept of creation of shared value, which I then pursued in this study and situated in the South African mining industry, informed, of course, by the fact that this industry is quite foundational to economic development of this very country.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So with your research, what gaps did you aim to address within the mining industry?
Yeah, so you look at the concept itself in terms of creation of shared value.
Yeah.
It's quite a new concept in business. It emerged around 2006, and much more was then written about it in 2011 by Porter and Kramer at Harvard Business School.
Okay.
This concept basically proposes that businesses can pursue opportunities that are able to enhance their competitive advantage, while at the same time creating value for communities over and above just creating some corporate social responsibilities, which you see as a concept that exists basically outside the business. So that is really the crux of this research that I needed to address. But the second part is from policy making perspective, as governments all over the world seek to pursue the agenda of sustainability, you've got to ask yourself, do we have policies that are capable of taking us there? And the reality is capitalism in its nature has been a greatest and the biggest contributor to some of the social problems that the world is experiencing, be it climate change, be it simple issues in our very own communities. You find that business in how they conduct themselves have been a greatest contributor. So those are gaps, but over and above the knowledge gap, and you also really find that on the ground, the concept itself has not necessarily gained traction, particularly in South Africa and other parts in developing countries.
And can you kindly just share some of the key findings from your research?
Yeah, so the study did not just want to look at the concept itself, whether it has been adopted in South Africa, but we also wanted to conceptualize a model or a framework that the mining industry and other industries could pursue. So in the study, we've first looked at issues of environmental consideration or environmental impact. We talk about it day in and day out to say companies must prioritize this particular area.
Yeah.
We also looked at whether we've got right policies or the mineral resource governance frameworks that are able to move us towards sustainability or creation of shared value. We looked at the issues of automation, issues of technology, but also looked at infrastructure itself. We talk, there's a lot of investment that government places on infrastructure development. Does this really lead to creation of value? We also looked at issues of employment conditions, because people who work in these businesses, in whether be it mining or any other industry, is people. So we looked at those factors to look at what are the antecedents that would lead us to creation of this shared value. And we found that if you focus on automation and innovation in terms of your business model, it will assist with regards to that. The study also found that if you focus on improving employment condition, it will also assist in that. The study results also show that if you look at your policies or your regulatory framework, if that is addressed, it can actually stimulate creation of shared value. So those are the findings. But what did we find as possible outcomes? We had projected or conceptualized that if you're able to create shared value, you will improve organizational performance, you will contribute towards sustainability, and you will also increase in terms of competitiveness. The results of the study indicate that indeed competitiveness of the businesses will increase. But what was more interesting is that we found that there is similarity in terms of how leaders in business view sustainability and organizational performance. So we then had to combine this as sustainable performance. In that you're able to achieve sustainability objectives, but also your business is able to sustain itself. Yeah. Those are the main findings of the research.
And then what would you say is the role, or you think the role that should be played by stakeholders like your government, industry, and local communities in order to create a shared value within the mining industry?
Yeah, it actually starts with questions, right? We've got to ask ourselves, mining activities are taking places next to our homes. Mining activities are taking place either at places that we associate with. And the biggest question from a community perspective that we need to ask ourselves is, what are we getting out of these activities? So it starts with the question. The South African mining industry is worth 900 plus billion. That is in terms of revenue it generates on an annual basis.
Yeah.
So if we are talking of all these billions, and you go back to the mining charter itself and look at what mining charter demands, the mining charter is very clear that there should be empowerment of local communities in terms of ownership. That is BEE. Their participation in the value chain is also explained in the very same mining charter, both in terms of employment opportunities, in that opportunities should be created for local communities. Housing has been given as also one of the, basically infrastructure development has been advanced as one of the things that mining companies should do for the local communities. The same mining charter also indicates that there should be some level of beneficiation. So we shouldn't mine here and take minerals out for processing. Now, I'm giving you this context so that you understand that when we talk of the role of government, we should then, as government or as policy makers, as politicians and parliamentarians, ask ourselves, out of this 900 billion plus that mining is generating on annual basis, are these mining conglomerates fulfilling all these obligations? Or we are just happy that mining companies they contribute about 7.5% of the GDP.
Yeah.
But you and I have got to deal with realities. People do not eat GDP.
Sure.
Sometimes GDP does not necessarily reflect the realities of people on the ground. In fact, it's a technical language for economists. The local communities do not understand that. Now, these are questions that we need to ask ourselves. Now that we've got these great policies, are these really adhered to? Are they really implemented on the ground? And that is the role that government has, is to make policies but also enforce them.
Yeah.
So that we check whether there is really some level of beneficiation taking place within the local communities, whether there is some activity that is taking place to empower local communities. You look at local stakeholders, be it academics, be it leaders in the communities. Are they asking right questions? Mining companies are supposed to pay royalties.
Royalties?
Yeah. So who is receiving these royalties as they mine in these local communities? Do communities even know that there should be a trust out of which they should also be benefiting? Or this money just goes to the traditional leadership and perhaps those that are politically connected to the same people, and that's it. So we all basically have a role to play, but it begins with us asking difficult questions. Government must ask, what is the value that mining is creating for the people, apart from the rental? And when I mean rental, I mean from tax and the idea that government is employing people. Because you've got to ask yourself, how much does a miner get compared to some of the CEOs of these mining conglomerates? It will take them almost their entire life to not even get to half of this, of what a CEO of a mining company earns per year. So these are some of the realities where we are saying academics need to bring this conversation to the fore, ask this difficult question, that as we talk about the gap of inequality between the rich and the poor, we must ask practical questions. What is mining doing to address this? And of course, other stakeholders include people who are just like me and you. We've got to then stimulate these conversations from any platform so that people are more informed, because in other instances, the truth is there is just a few people in that community who understand how mining should take place, or how they should at least benefit out of it.
Yeah.
And if it's a few who know, if they are benefiting already, the truth is they will keep quiet and not talk about it. So awareness is also very important and plays a critical role in making sure that all these stakeholders are able to understand their responsibilities and ask difficult questions. That's how we begin to say, you've got to know that how you're doing business does not resonate with the local community. It does not resonate with the ideals of this government. It doesn't resonate with the policies that this country has in the space. And that is how you stimulate a different way of thinking, or a paradigm shift from saying, let's perhaps move from how we're doing business now and do business in a way that empowers the local communities.
Yeah. So it's just talking about local communities, because I'm thinking, or basically when a mine wants to operate in a certain community, there is what is it?
The consultation.
Yeah, consultation, and they would look at the community needs, and then they will say, no, we will fulfill 1, 2, 3, and then maybe a community is like, oh, okay, we're getting a school. So you're saying, Uti, there's more that can be done instead of just looking at the community's needs and then just supplying the certain need.
Yeah.
So a mining company has more responsibilities, and community members need to know about that.
Yeah, I would say that. I mean, you see, when mining companies are applying for either prospecting and mining license, they make certain obligations. These obligations are not just about funding for the project. It's not just about the yellow equipment or the plant. But some of these commitments include mining companies committing to how they would develop the local communities.
Yeah.
And some of these commitments, when they are made, it's all well and good. We consult the municipal development plan so that we identify areas where we can build a school, where we can build a road. But the reality is these mining companies are operating in the space, in this very village, in this very community, in this township. Now, it cannot be seen as a once-off commitment. It has to be a lifelong commitment on the part of mining companies because they exist here. So building a school does not necessarily create a lasting value. Yes, to some extent it does. But we really have to ask ourselves, when you build a school, it's a once-off investment. Right? But if you say, I want to then invest in something else in this very community that builds that community towards sustainability, that means you're contributing beyond these once-off handouts, which, we critically, we consider them to just be some kind of marketing gimmicks. That whenever you enter a certain space, simply because they don't have water, you drill water, you create a borehole and say, yeah, we've created a space, your kids can now go swim.
And then you give them jobs, and then once the mine comes to the end, you leave them stranded. And then when there's zamazamas, we then blame zamazamas.
Correct.
Instead of looking at the problem
Beyond.
beyond
And
zamazama.
again, you've got to ask yourself again, the mining charter talks about decent jobs.
Yeah.
It's not talking about jobs. It's talking about decent jobs. And it takes us back to what I was saying. What is this decent job that we're talking about? There is the idea from mining industry that if you're able to reduce your cost of operations or operational cost, you increase your revenue or your profit because you're paying very little and you're making huge sums of profits. So paying your employees less and you just tell them, oh no, we created employment, none of you was working, you're not even educated. So it sounds like you're doing something, but in reality, if you look at the gap between the man who really mines the mineral and the man who is at the helm of these mining conglomerates, you will see that something is not right.
Yeah.
The gap is too wide. And that is where we are saying perhaps consideration should be, how do we create opportunities that can last even beyond? In this context, we are saying from a shared value perspective, you can train miners in a way that when your mine closes, they are able to pursue an alternative opportunity.
Yeah.
Coca-Cola in Brazil came up with a very interesting model. Entered a community, employed people, but they realized that there was high employment rate, which means crime and all other social ills will be high, and therefore their product may not necessarily sell. What do they do in Brazil? What Coca-Cola does, they develop a skills development program where they're saying to the locals, come participate. And one of the findings of that program was that there was low self-esteem amongst the youth. Now, what did they do? They then say, we will empower you in entrepreneurship. Then what Coca-Cola did was that it then took its distribution model. Instead of selling to your big companies, they then say, we will give youth who are prepared to go into entrepreneurship so that they can sell directly to their people. What I'm saying here is that means as they are selling directly to their people, Coca-Cola increased its revenue, but at the same time created opportunities that are lasting for the local communities. You're reducing unemployment.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that we believe that if mining was to look at this, there is no point that an old man who is to retire in the mining space should not be able to find an alternative income earning opportunity elsewhere.
Yeah.
We should prepare them. Technology is coming. We hear of layoffs in mining. What are mines doing to prepare their workforce for future labor requirements? In other words, we must be future-based or future-proof. We
Yeah.
need to look at technology and how do we integrate that in skills development.
Okay. And then with when it comes to policy implementation, if truly the policies were implemented, how would the mining industry in South Africa be looking? Like, if truly all the government was making sure that all mining companies adhere to all the policies, how would the mining industry be looking like?
Yeah. Currently, mining contributes 7.5%, somewhere thereabout in terms of GDP. In terms of employment numbers, you're looking at 465,000 people.
Yeah.
In terms of revenue it generates and taxes, you're talking about good monies. Because I'm also an accountant, I'm also a tax practitioner. You ask yourself, do you really think all taxes are being paid? Because if taxes are really being paid, perhaps the national fiscus would be having more money. We wouldn't be talking about VAT increase.
Yeah.
So that is where policy implementation and monitoring becomes critical. When your government is making policies which it enforces, it means government will be able to generate money. But at the same time, if the mining charter is actually implemented, that means government is no longer burdened with the responsibility of taking care of the local communities, because already when it comes to employment, mining companies that are operating in particular regions will be creating employment, which means they are stimulating employment in those particular areas.
Yeah.
When it comes to issues of health, from infrastructure perspective, clinics should be there. It should not only be the responsibility of government, because these people who are affected by mining activities are local communities, and this is exactly where mines are operating.
Yeah.
They should be contributing towards development of such kind of infrastructure. Remember, if these people are healthy, that means they will have a healthy labor force. Yeah.
Wonderful. So I know there are talks of now realizing the importance of small-scale mining, junior scale mining, and then of course we have that the big players, the large-scale mining. So when you look at the research you did in shared service, and then the pushing of small-scale and junior scale, how do then they work together in making sure that we go forward, or the mining industry goes forward?
Yeah. So it's a very good question, and what is more interesting is in this study, if you look at strategies on how mining could basically implement shared value, you're looking at 3 strategies at the center of it. You've got to reimagine your market or your product. That is the first part.
Okay.
The second part is you have got a responsibility to redefine your productivity value chain. While the third aspect, which is very important, it says you need to ensure or rather develop the local cluster. What does it mean? It means if you can empower the people who are participating in the value creation process at a local level, you will be able to create more value for yourself as a mining company. So if you look at the integration between the two, you've got to look at, if I am mining in a particular area, and in this area I've realized that I'm no longer attaining the necessary productivity as I anticipated. How do I then move out of that mine without disrupting the life of that particular community? And this is where you would see a synergy that should actually come quite naturally, where you could say big mining conglomerates should basically serve as incubators of junior miners. Once a junior mining company has been approved by Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, how do we then say, we are about to disinvest from this particular mine? Now we want you to come as cooperatives. In other words, have local mining companies come, provide bids in terms of how they would run such kind of operations. So as you're pulling out, instead of you being worried about rehabilitation, you're literally just changing your model.
Okay.
You're basically using them as your contractors as you're moving out in a more of a phased out approach. You're phasing out your operations. The junior mining companies are beginning their operations. That means there is no illegality out of it.
Yeah.
But the issue is it requires a different, it requires paradigm shift from this idea that I just need to benefit, and once I've benefited, there's nothing left for me. I just walk out because there's a lot of damage that is being created. And if my big mining conglomerates and government were to take that approach, there would be less mines that are not rehabilitated.
Yeah.
Because when you're moving out as a big mining conglomerate, the mine shifts into a secondary life of sorts, where the mining happens, but at a lower scale for the benefit of the local communities, by the local communities, for the local communities.
Because I also learned that apparently the government gets reluctant in issuing a closure certificate, because once they do that, then the responsibility relies with them. So with them applying shared service, it would actually help them in a way.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah.
So remember, government, once a mine is closed, at the time of the mining operation, if anything goes wrong from a legal perspective, the mine has to take responsibility. In other words, the liability lies with that particular mine. In other words, if the ecological environment of a particular place is affected, or the employees are affected, if they approach courts currently, the courts or such a litigation is against the mine, not necessarily against government. The moment government issues a mining closure certificate, that means government is now placing itself in a space where it's now taking responsibility. So the minister of the relevant department then becomes responsible for it. Now, government will not easily issue certificates because they have not done what they were supposed to have done in the first place. So they are running away from vicarious liability. So what they do is, let's play safe and leave it like that. And once Zamazamas are in, we will then cry and say people are the problem.
So how can then organization in the mining industry promote a shared value approach?
It's paradigm shift in that the leadership in these spaces, they have to be alive to the sustainability agenda.
Yeah.
The truth is, we now live in a world where I want to believe that 10 years ago, when we talk about issues of sustainability, you and I also thought this issue of climate change was a by the way side kind of a conversation.
Yeah, it's one of those.
It never seemed so much of something that is really taking place right here at our doorsteps. I always say, look at KZN, floods and all other things. Those are symptomatic of climate change. But the social ills also in our communities are symptomatic of the problems that have been created by some of the business practices. So paradigm shift is required from the leaders in business. Paradigm shift is required from policymakers to say, is this approach working? And if it is not working, we need to look at what is working and what is not working. And the truth is, we need to focus on minimizing the cost of doing business by then optimizing or addressing social issues or issues that are of mutual interest. And if we do that, we're able to create value. And as I said, you can either look at redefining your products. Yes, mines are there for mining specific minerals, but you can look at mine. I mean, in Mpumalanga, right here at home, Anglo-American was mining coal, and what did they do? They realized that water was becoming acidic. They also could not get water from the local community. What do? They implement a water reticulation plant. So that means they are now reducing their operating cost.
Okay.
Because now they are having their own water that they produce themselves, but they are selling water to the municipality. So you've created value for the municipality, but you've also then said to the local community, here is cheap water. But the product of water is so remote from mining activities, if you think of it. But that is how, those are some of the strategies you need, and empowering the local businesses. That works. In Chile, BHP, Bilton, and Codelco, They had challenges with water supply. They had challenges with supply of some tech equipment. They had challenges with supply of electricity. What do? They go into supply development drive. Because you're sourcing these products locally, they've become far much cheaper. In South Africa, mining sources a lot of their equipment outside the country. If these yellow equipments are manufactured right here in our country, you've created employment from production of those this very equipment, but at the same time, you're getting it cheaper. So that means you would increase production. Those are some of the things we need to think of, but beyond the traditional ways of doing business or mining industry activities.
Wonderful. So just in closing, let's say right now there were stakeholders in this room with us, being community members, mining companies, other stakeholders, and then they then say to us, sell us this shit service, why should we consider it? How is it going to help the mining industry? How is the community going to benefit from this research that you have done? Just close it.
Yeah, I would say for quite some time, we have had these corporate social responsibility programs that are undertaken by mining companies and many other businesses. And the truth is, we have not seen the true value of it. It's very few people that benefit out of those initiatives. But from a business model perspective, corporate shared responsibility programs are only a cost to the business. It's money going out. You're not necessarily creating any value for yourself, except, of course, it's a marketing gimmick in other instances and corporate greenwashing. So I would say if you look at these things, we've got to come to realization that these initiatives have not necessarily worked. And therefore, as communities, we need to come to then our senses and say, how was I really supposed to be benefiting beyond just employment? Are these minerals not supposed to be processed in my province, in my region? I've got to ask those questions. And when it comes to government has got to ask itself, how long do I service this community when there is a mining company that is generating income from sources that I own? And therefore, how do I then make sure that the policies that I have, they are practically implemented? Therefore, government should make sure that it enforces these. And of course, to the academic community, to all the leaders in business and outside, we've got to then ask ourselves, are we asking the right questions in how business activities are being conducted? Because remember, shared value is not just about donation. And this is not about abandoning profit making. It's instead an approach to business where we are saying you can increase your competitiveness, you can increase your income generating opportunities while you simultaneously address the social and economic conditions of the communities within which you operate.
Wonderful. Dr. Khubana, thank you so much for this lovely conversation. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed speaking to you. And I am sure I'm going to be inviting you again just to also learn about the others that you spoke to me about off camera. Because you are still doing more research.
Yeah, there's more research we're doing, and when we are required to come to the platform, we are almost certainly ready to do that.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thank you.
That was Dr. Khubana, who was speaking to us about his research that he conducted on shared value within the mining industry. And with that being said, I'd like to thank Menor again for sponsoring or making this podcast possible, and also thank my team, Kamuhelo Malangabi, Tsepo Munyamani, as well as Nkele Khatebe. And again, I will remind you that please do not forget to subscribe, like, share, follow, so you do not miss any of our episodes. With that being said, thank